Yes, tomorrow is the one-year anniversary of Liz Truss's mini-budget, which had major ramifications on the economy, and it's an anniversary Labour do not want us to forget about. They've even announced a new law they say they will pass inspired by it, making it a legal requirement of any government that makes changes to tax or spending, major changes, to publish a forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility. It's got some praise, among them former Tory Chancellor George Osborne. But the almost backhanded endorsement, something Labour say they're most pleased about, is Liz Truss, who says it's a terrible idea. As one Labour MP texted me earlier on, if the woman who crashed the economy says it's wrong, we must be doing something right. Now, earlier on, Keir Starmer and his shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, sat down for a rare double-headed interview with Christian Guruma. I think, in fact, they actually stood up. And listen out to the number of times you hear the phrases or some variant of economic stability or fiscal responsibility. The message they are desperate to hammer home is, if you want level heads running the economy, they say it's them.
Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, welcome. This is our first joint interview with you, and we're focusing on economic policy. So who's in charge?
We're jointly in charge and working with a good partner. You'll need this for Strictly, where
we're not going to break into dance, don't worry.
You work as a team of two, but we're not going to foxtrot
Right,
just at the moment.
So you're more sort of Cameron Osborne than Blair Brown, is what you're saying. You're in unison.
Let's maybe take that as far as unison. Obviously different policies, but that approach of working together, that's what we do day in, day out.
But if you want to extend the Strictly metaphor, you see, someone has to lead.
Of course, Keir is the leader. Keir's the
Right,
leader of the Labour Party.
But every leader needs that strong support, as you will see on Strictly. But there's beyond the relationship, which is strong. We work together, we think together. We have together changed the Labour Party. And the Labour Party now is a completely changed party to the party that lost so badly in 2019.
Now, you've announced that you're going to empower the Office of Budget Responsibility to be able to, do its own projections, and that's all about stability again. The danger of stability, surely, is that you have boxed yourselves in to the same spending plans as the Conservatives.
The idea now is that we'll have a rule that the OBR must make an assessment if there's going to be significant fiscal statements about tax or spend.
But it does box you in, doesn't it? I mean, you'll know as Shadow Chancellor that the current spending projections show that after the next election, there will be severe cuts, billions and billions of pounds of cuts in key departments, justice, local authorities, education, potentially.
We totally reject austerity. There'll be no return to austerity.
So none of those cuts that are currently in the plans would happen?
A Labour government. Overall, in the OBR forecast, and we're going to have two more before the next election, it has increases in public spending in real terms over the forecast horizon. But the most important
But not for every department.
Well, let me just say this. The most important thing is stability, because it is stability that enables family finances to improve, and it's stability that encourages business to invest. And we've got to unlock the growth potential in our economy.
So is that a guarantee then? I mean, the overall spending will go up, of course, but can you guarantee that no department will face cuts under a Labour government?
Well, look, we will set out our manifesto ahead of the election, but there'll be no return to austerity under a Labour government. We've set out a set of fiscal rules, but we've also said, for example, that we'll get rid of the non-dom tax status, and we will use that money to invest in our NHS and breakfast clubs.
So you don't have a growth plan as such. You're saying that stability will just bring growth?
Well, no, we've set out a number of aspects of our growth plan. For example, reform to planning to make it easier to build those offshore wind farms, easier to build new housing. So we've got that. We've got the plan to invest alongside businesses through our National Wealth Fund in the jobs and the industries of the future.
The trouble is, though, that what you're saying was sort of written in a world in which we thought Britain was the sick man of the G7 and hadn't recovered as quickly as everybody else. It now turns out the British economy was growing faster than many other countries in the G7, and growth is doing pretty well.
Let's just have a reality check.
Yes.
If you look at the last 13 years, growth has been almost stagnant for 13 years. And it might suit the Prime Minister to pretend that everything is fine, and it probably is in his world, but that clashes against the reality of the lives of millions of working people who every day are struggling to make ends meet. Every day are having to make difficult decisions about what they buy in the supermarket. And they are the ones paying the price of the failure of the last 13 years.
Yeah, and this is sort of low growth trajectory we're in. You know, we've been revised up from no growth to low growth, but you know, that's not the summit of our ambition.
But when are you going to deliver your growth? I mean, because if your green plan has kind of slowed down.
The Green Prosperity Plan is an important part of what we're setting out, but is only one part of a much wider growth plan. But in the end, everything has to be built on this rock of economic stability.
Well, just on net zero then, I mean, you know, you want to stick to the 2030 target for vehicles. You also want to decarbonise electricity by 2030. Why do you want to go faster than everybody else in Europe when money is expensive, when we don't have a workforce? You're going to put costs up by rushing rather than waiting until 2035.
We don't accept that at all. The cheapest form of energy is renewable energy. We have a potential to be global leaders in some of these industries of the future. And the thing about moving fast is you get those jobs and you get those investments, and then you have the opportunity to export that all around the world.
Let's talk about tax then for a moment. You know, we are at a tax burden of 37% of national income. Businesses want to know, under a Labour government, will that stay the same? Will it go down? Will it go up?
Well, Rachel, you've dealt with this so many times.
Yeah, look, we have the highest tax burden for 70 years. And I don't wake up in the morning and think, how can we impose more taxes? I want taxes on working people and ordinary businesses to be lower, not
So the
higher.
overall burden would go down?
Well, look, I'm not going to make, and you know this, any unfunded commitment on spending or taxation, but I do not want a higher tax burden.
But in
that
principle,
said,
you've ruled out things like wealth taxes. Does that mean a Labour government really isn't going to tackle the inequality within our tax system?
I believe if you make Britain your home, you should pay your taxes here, and under Labour you will. We'll get rid of the non-dom tax status, and that will bring in £3 billion a year. But in the end, what motivates me and what I want to achieve, and what Keir wants to achieve with, we hope, the next Labour government, is to grow the economy so that living standards can improve, and so we have the money to invest in our public services, and that is our number one priority.
But it is so important that we get across that this changed Labour Party is putting the economy and growth central.
Yes.
Now, I accept that in the past other governments have talked a lot about tax, a lot about spend, but our joint and strong view is that the key to this is growth.
But wouldn't the single most effective way to improve growth in Britain would be to look at rejoining the single market? And you've said again today, there is no case. Now, no case is a very strong thing to say, and it's difficult to believe that you really think that. You know, no case means under no circumstances, never. Is that really what you're saying?
We've had low growth for 13 years. So the argument that this is all down to Brexit just doesn't wash.
You've used a very absolute phrase, which is there is no case. That means never. Is that really what you're saying?
There's no case for going back into the EU. We've had a referendum. The country has decided. We've been through a huge period of uncertainty as a result, and there's no case for going back. But that does not mean that we have any less ambition on growth. It does not mean that we haven't got a very strong growth plan. The frustration is that, you know, the longer it takes before we have a general election, the more we have the hallmark of this government, which is chop, change your mind, stop, start. Rachel's had 4 chancellors to shadow. I've had 3 prime ministers. This is the definition of the failure of the last few years.
Well, just sticking with Europe for a moment, can I ask you about your meeting with France and what you're trying to achieve on asylum seekers? Would it under a Labour government, would there be safe and legal routes for asylum seekers to come to Britain?
Let me take this in stages, because I did go over to The Hague and to France last week. The first thing we need to do is secure our borders. At the moment, the government's completely lost control of the borders. I do not accept that it's impossible to take down the gangs that are running the vile trade of putting people into small boats to cross across the channel. We know the boats are being made to order. We know they're being stored in warehouses. Then they're being brought to the northern shore of France. I've worked on joint operations when I was Director of Public Prosecutions. I know you can smash those gangs. I'm determined we will do it. So that's to stop, the door being open. Once people are here, then obviously their claims have to be processed. The government's got itself into a hopeless situation where it hasn't stop people coming because it's failed on the border. It's not processing the claims. So there's a burgeoning number of people costing £2 billion a year to the taxpayer in hotel bills. Now, of course, if someone fails in their asylum claim, they then need to be returned. And the sooner those decisions are made, the better. So I am interested in this question.
So that's what you're trying to get France to agree to allow the return.
Hear me out, because the first thing to say is, to return to a safe third country, Albania or India, you don't need a returns agreement with the EU. So we can just get on with that if we process the claims. Of course, we're interested in whether there can be some sort of agreement with the EU, but we're not talking about going into the scheme that's barely working, by the way, for EU members.
But when would there be safe and legal routes? Because that's the thing that will stop the drownings.
Well, there are some safe and supposedly legal routes. Afghanistan, for example,
Very
which the
limited,
government
as you
isn't
know.
running properly. But the first thing to do is secure the borders. Second thing to do is to process the claims. And the third is to have a proper system in place for returning those whose
So this could take
claims are
years,
made.
couldn't it? We could see another year or 2 years before you get anywhere near an agreement, before you're able to, you know, create the safe and legal routes that stop people risking their lives.
I was talking last week about a security agreement with the EU when I was over at Europol. I think that could be put in place very quickly. But I'm not going to be put off. I do not think that it is beyond our collective ability to stop these gangs in the first. Why are we allowing them to manufacture boats, to move them across the continent? People get in them at the Channel, and we sit back and say, oh, nothing we can really do about that. I didn't accept that when I was dealing with terrorists as the Director of Public Prosecutions. I'm not going to accept it if I'm privileged enough to be Prime Minister.
Just finally, as you know, what some people are saying about the Labour Party is, you know, where's the excitement? Where's the hope? You know, they're just another more competent version of the Conservative Party is what's on offer. And what's the point of that? What's your answer? Where's the hope?
I think that this suggestion that you have sort of reassurance here and hope there and the two can't go together is completely wrong. What we want to do is to weld reassurance and hope together. You can't have hope without reassurance, and that's why I've set out 5 strong missions for an incoming Labour government. It's a million miles from where this government is.
Sir Keir Starmer, Rachel Rees, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.